In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps on the path of omniscience. May this arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. Good evening. So we begin our fourth segment out of 5 and going through this amazing, huge text, Moonbeams of Mahamudra. And just to acknowledge that not all of us were here last time, and so here we're all joined back together again, which is very nice. And a number of people couldn't make it tonight. Will join us in the future. So I had suggested for tonight's class that we do a little review and overview. And thought, let's see, do a couple of things. Share some outlines. Oh, here we go. This one's better. Okay. Oops. Let's see. Okay. Everyone can see the screen? So here's the general outline of our text. Introduction to reasons it is necessary to meditate in the nature of mind begins the text, because that is the special, extraordinary, unique feature of Mahamudra meditation, is that instead of going through many different types of objects of meditation, such as is normal in the Sutrayana tradition, meditating on the skandhas, meditating on the ayatanas, meditating on the dhatus, meditating on external objects of various types, meditating on internal objects of various types. The Mahamudra technique cuts to the chase and meditates directly on the nature of mind. Now in practice, as we saw when we go through the sections of the text that describe the Mahamudra meditation, there's a progression of topics that leads to that stage of meditating on the nature of mind. But as long as we have that understanding as that is the objective, or the goal, or the sort of major strategy for Mahamudra, meditating on the nature of mind, when we are meditating on other objects, it will be different from meditating on them without knowing that really they are leading up to meditation on the nature of mind. And the book is divided basically into two parts: common samadhis and uncommon Mahamudra. The common samadhi has these four parts: a presentation of shamatha vipassana, that's the ways, shamatha and vipassana, explanation of the ways to cultivate samadhi. Let's make this a little bit bigger. How's that? So we're cultivating samadhi, meditation, and where does that come from? That comes from the scheme of the general scheme of the Buddhist endeavor of enlightenment, which involves the three higher trainings of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So Samadhi is the second of those. And while there is some order to their cultivation, they are very much intertwined, the Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. And in particular, we'll see that Samadhi, correctly practiced, really requires at some point understanding what we're doing, which is the first of the two stages of the the first two of the three stages of prajna, of hearing and contemplating. And then upon that basis, we can genuinely cultivate samadhi. And the proposition is that samadhi consists of basically two types of meditation, shamatha and vipassana. And that those sum up all types of samadhis. So the text uses the term shamatha samadhi, vipassana samadhi, and samadhi in general, and maybe sometimes shamatha vipassana samadhi. And then we have the sort of the heart of the matter, the way to cultivate shamatha. And it has a section on preparation, which has a wonderful section. I think we'll flip through in a minute. Just wanted to do the large overview. So the objects of meditation, what are the possible objects? And this is much more complicated than like going from pebbles to statues to syllables visualized to breath. And then the key factors of meditation right at the beginning are highlighted: mindfulness and alertness. We'll see the formal definitions of those and how they function. And then the way to practice shamatha, which includes all the usual aspects of obstacles, antidotes, stages, and powers. Thirdly, the way to cultivate vipassana in general. And in general means cultivating the view. Vipassana in the common Sutrayana tradition is very much a conceptual, analytical process or practice that involves understanding what is the true nature of reality from a Buddhist point of view, and how do we mistake that, and how do we correct the mistake. And the focus is on the absence of self, and the self has two manifestations: the self of persons and the self of phenomena. Hopefully we're all very familiar with those. And then the actual way to meditate on that view of the emptiness or the absence of self is being very clear about what the correct view is, and then cultivating that correct view in meditation, which is very much taking the progression of the three prajnas, hearing and contemplating, the view, and then putting that contemplated understanding of the nature of selflessness into our meditation practice. And then the way that that is cultivated in post-meditation. Removing doubts about how to sustain meditation on the view. Some interesting little aspects, analytical and resting meditation, how those apply to shamatha and vipassana. And then some comments about the actual view. Removing or resolving doubts about the view. Uncommon Mahamudra has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chapters. Chapters 5 through 11. 12, 13, 14. Surprise. Has 11 chapters. A lot of chapters. Big book. Part 2 of our 5-part series began with this chapter 5, generating confidence. Confidence in the practice, confidence in the lineage, confidence in the Mahamudra technique, the Mahamudra, the ground path and fruition of Mahamudra, and all that that represents or encompasses in terms of support from sutras and tantras and great lineage holders of India and Tibet. Then cultivating the preliminaries for Mahamudra practice, just like with shamatha and vipassana in the comments section. For each there's a section on the prerequisites, and here there's the explanation of the preliminaries for the Mahamudra process. And if one has not undertaken the formal practice of the preliminaries, these can be done in an informal way. And we can touch on that as we encounter it and when we go through in a little more detail. The way to cultivate Mahamudra was a 2-page section, interestingly. And then there's Mahamudra Shamatha. And this focuses on a scheme of progression of shamatha, going from shamatha with characteristics to without characteristics. And interestingly, with characteristics had 2 parts, with support and without support. And so we had shamatha without support, without any object, that still had characteristics. And it was a little vague what actually characteristics meant in this context. And it seems to have something to do with the understanding of the different factors of meditation, the obstacles and antidotes, and that whole scheme as being a support, whereas without characteristics had to do more with spontaneous experience of meditation, regardless of whether it was with or without support. And then a short section on how to maintain stillness within all the approaches, which is the culmination of the shamatha practice in the Mahamudra tradition. The instructions in vipassana, why it's necessary, the preparations, and then the way to cultivate vipassana. Focusing the reasons that objectives, meaning the objective of vipassana, is achieved by observing just the mind. Why is it that we can gain our objective of the Buddhist project through just observing the mind? The mind is the root of everything. Everything begins and ends with the mind. And so what are the different aspects of mind? How do we understand mind in a way that brings us realization or liberation from ignorance? Understanding the root of the mind as being unborn, and understanding the branches and the trunk and branches that arise from the root of the mind as being without abiding and ceasing. Those are thoughts and appearances. Appearances are what comes in through our senses. And then some discussion about like what is genuine vipassana, how do we know if it's being cultivated, arising or not, differences between it developing or not, and then correlating vipassana with other approaches. And then the process of the pointing out instructions in spiritual practice, determining the abiding state of mind as having these three characteristics, or three aspects. I should use that term instead of using the term that's one of them. The essence of mind, the nature of mind, and the characteristic of mind. And we saw how the essence and nature were confusingly presented as either emptiness or luminosity. There was sort of not a uniformity in the tradition as to whether the essence was luminous or the nature was luminous and the essence empty or the nature empty. But somehow between the two of them, we had empty luminosity, and then the characteristic was the unceasing manifestation of appearances, thoughts and appearances. And then ascertaining the connateness. Connateness, what an odd term. The connateness, the quality of being born together. What is it that's born together? The essence and nature of mind and its manifestations are born simultaneously together. There's not a separation. That the manifestations of mind don't leave the nature and essence of mind. So the manifestations of mind as thoughts and appearances are very much as much empty luminosity as the root of the mind is. There's no division. The feeling in our own minds of there being a watcher watching some objects within the mind is an unreal dualistic illusion. So then the pointing out is actually pointing out that quality of born togetherness of mind itself, i.e. its root, its manifestation as thoughts and appearances. And then refining that understanding that was pointed out. What are some mistakes that are often made? What are some problems that occur? And then what is flawless meditation upon the basis of what is pointed out? And then we come to the topic for our current segment, which is the way to sustain the practice of meditation. Once we have recognition, how do we continue to sustain that recognition in our practice and in our life? And why is it necessary? Well, because it just doesn't stay there by itself somehow. And so how do we sustain it? By eating a balanced diet of mindfulness, alertness, and conscientiousness. Which those three factors are just universally the main factors in meditation. And specifically that mindfulness is the crucial one of those, because without mindfulness, neither of the other two exist. And so similar to mind in its appearances, mindfulness is the root, and alertness and conscientiousness are what develop from that and support that. And so often the term mindfulness is used in a way that includes the other two aspects, alertness and conscientiousness. These terms, mindfulness, alertness, and conscientiousness, are what the Elizabeth Callahan, the translator of this particular text, uses to translate certain terms. You may have seen other translations for these terms. Mindfulness is pretty universal. Alertness is sometimes awareness, sometimes vigilance, sometimes introspection, sometimes investigation. So it has a range of translations that are actually very different in English. And I think it might be helpful to actually know that range of translations so that you get a feel for what the term actually conveys, is meant to convey. Conscientiousness also has alternates such as heedfulness. Those two are pretty much the common ones for conscientiousness. Methods for sustaining meditation during equipoise, which is meditation, and then during post-meditative attainment. So, going through the details of that during this course. And second topic or chapter for this fourth course is eliminating deviations and strains. How to correct bad habits in meditation, how to recognize them is the first step. Knowing what bad habits are in meditation and then correcting them. I think we're all quite familiar with identifying the bad habit of being lost in thought. That's sort of the basic bad habit that we all experience a lot of the time, I think. Or at least I do. And but there's further subtleties to the situation. Once we actually come into the present in a reliable, somewhat continuous fashion, there's a huge amount of nuance in terms of how we remain present. So we see 4 deviations, 3 strains, and then clearing away hindrances. So we'll go into those, and then the final chapter for this segment is enhancement, concluding that mind is unborn. I think that was sort of concluded earlier in the text, and maybe it's sort of coming to conviction that mind is unborn. Breaking through to the unborn transparency of mind. Sort of a major progress in meditation. Breaking through the conceptual fabric, the conceptual web of our mind, and experiencing that web as being unborn and transparent, and thereby discovering the abiding state of the basic nature. So very much a transformational stage or experience in our meditation, practice. Then how do we, what sort of activity or way of conducting ourselves integrates that breakthrough experience, that cultivation of shamatha and vipassana that we've been doing for so long? How do we bring that into our lives, which is described by this phrase, bringing experiences onto the path? Bringing our meditation practice into the path or onto the path. And there's these 6 types of path integration, turning bad omens into auspicious ones, and integrating mental afflictions, converting obstacles into cities, and integrating suffering, transforming into bodhicitta, working with illness, and equalizing the elements, and then integrating death into our path. Sounds like a very useful section. Just a quick peek at the remaining sections of the text. Chapter 14, the way realization of the 4 yogas develop through sustaining that meditation practice, sustaining that experience of breakthrough. The 4 yogas in a very summary level, general level, the 4 yogas being the stages of accomplishment as mapped out in the Mahamudra tradition, which correlate to the 5 paths of the Sutrayana tradition of Buddhism. So the 4 yogas are then explained in more detail. One-pointedness, freedom from elaborations, the second one, often translated as simplicity. The yoga of one taste is the third, and the yoga of non-meditation is the 4th. And then how these correlate to the bhumis and the 5 paths. colophon. So after this course, we'll have the 4 yogas to go through in the fifth and final segment, which will be in the springtime. Comments? Anything before we... I thought we could flip through the text page by page, which I've been doing in preparation for tonight. Comments, questions, thoughts? Everybody have... Robert.
I was just thinking how there was a lot of discussion last time about getting over the hump of everything being mind. You know, that was an obstacle in some places, and then, but the practice is the meditation on the nature of mind, and all the other practices before that. Well, according to if everything is mind, they're also meditation on mind. We're just not acknowledging it.
There's nothing.
So like meditation on a pebble is also meditation on mind, or mind's reaction to a pebble. So I found that kind of interesting, kind of like a spiral staircase in a way.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, the view that everything is mind is a huge leap for most of us. And that turns out to be a fairly persistent theme in the Mahamudra meditation. And so it's helpful to identify to the extent to which we're comfortable with that and not. And to the extent that we're not comfortable with that, ideally to set out to explore that over time and not let it hold us back from, in the meantime, cultivating our meditation practice of the Mahamudra style, but to maintain an open mind to that idea and pursue it by, I think, two means. One is the more common and unappealing method of like reading like complicated texts that present the reasons for that. And then the other, I think, is probably much more, certainly more accessible and possibly more helpful, is just to practice what would my experience be like if everything actually was mind? And, you know, the first question we all have is, well, what are all these other people doing here? And are they in my mind? And are they all imagining that they have their own mind and they're really just mine? And the answer from this tradition is there are other people, there are other minds, and we're all experiencing the projection of mind. We experience our projection of mind, and our projection of our mind turns out to be incredibly similar to the projection of mind that everybody else experiences, especially human beings. We're not too sure about animals and other creatures. But basically the reason why we all appear in this realm, in this universe, on this planet, is because we have shared karma that has led us to experience the projection of mind in a way that conforms with everyone else who appeared here. All of the people who experience the projection of their mind in a different way are not here because they experience a different projection.
Including in this class.
That's right.
We are.
So there's this idea that there's somewhat of a shared larger projection of mind. that we all share in and experience and can agree, oh yeah, that's a tree and a car and so on and so forth. And then there's the unshared experience of our own inner world of our thoughts and opinions and stored memories and habitual patterns and so forth, which is the accumulation over our lifetime or lifetimes of the combination of what we've experienced from the external projection and how our particular mind stream has reacted to that. But it certainly, I think that's a really interesting practice. Is as much as you can to contemplate, like, what if this all really is a projection of our minds? And it doesn't mean that all of the difficulty and suffering and pain and so forth that people are experiencing is any less real. Nor does it mean that there's any less reason to try to reduce and eliminate the suffering of sentient beings. But it just lends a very different sort of hue to our experience. And on the other hand, not to let that aspect of the tradition, that aspect of the view, impede you from cultivating the mental training that is involved in meditation in general and in the Mahamudra tradition, which basically in the Mahamudra tradition is looking at your mind. What is my mind? All that as much as possible is really the main aspect of training in Mahamudra, is to be looking at our mind. And it's not a whole lot different from what we've been doing from day one in meditation practice, except that there's the difference is that we're looking at the looker that's looking at the mind. So when we say looking at the mind, it's actually pretty vague, because the mind has this wonderful ability to be like an onion and have like zillions of different corners and rooms and aspects and parts to it. And we're particularly interested in the part that seems like it's the center of the universe. And that part isn't necessarily like the one that's talking to us all the time. It's the one that's listening to the one that's talking to us, right? So identifying that point, that very root, is the most important thing. Anyway, thank you for that, Rob. Anything else? Eric.
On the point you just made, is there actually a center, or is there kind of either infinite egress, or there just isn't a center?
Yeah, what do you think?
That's what I've always kind of wondered, frankly. I mean, I always sort of thought, in my experience, for what it's worth, as infinite egress. I mean, infinite regress, like like a hall of mirrors or something,
Yeah,
rather than that there is a center, which seems somewhat theistic to actually
yeah,
posit that there's a center.
yeah, I totally agree. It feels like there's a center, and we create that center as part of our habitual or sort of innate need to have a center. To think that we exist means that there's a center. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the very root of the illusion of self. And so that's where the book starts. So let's dive into that. Let's, on page 6, the first part of the book is, why do we meditate on the nature of mind? All phenomena contained within samsara and nirvana, all possible appearances, are our own mind. And so that's what we work with. second part of that first section is the problems of not meditating on the nature of mind on page 9. Is there anybody digital that I should know about so I can help you locate where we are? Everybody has a hard copy of the text? Cool.
I have the digital, but it matches up pretty much. So it's
Great.
okay.
So page numbers, if I do that, works. Good. So the problems of not meditating on the nature of mind is that no matter how much we listen to and reflect upon the words of the Dharma, we'll only be able to attain a temporary type of result. Transformation comes about through transforming the mind. And so let's dive into the common samadhis, shamatha and vipassana, page 17. So the common exposition of shamatha and vipassana, we see the breakdown there in the first part in that, the presentation of the causes of shamatha and vipassana. It is said in unraveling the intent, which is the root source in the Mahayana tradition for the practice of shamatha and vipassana. It's a sutra that this translator is translating as unraveling the intent. And there are numerous quotes from that text throughout our text. Bhagavan, from what causes do shamatha and vipassana arise, says Maitreya to the Buddha. Buddha says, Maitreya, they develop from the cause of pure ethical conduct, shila, and the cause of the pure view that is known through listening and reflecting. So, shamatha and vipassana arise from having cultivated shila as well as the first couple of types of vipassana. What brings us to the meditation cushion is some insight that something might happen on that cushion. Unless we're literally forced by somebody to sit on a cushion and meditate, like maybe a partner of some sort, right? Like say you're freaking out of control, and if you don't meditate, I'm leaving you. But otherwise, if we do it on our own accord, there's some insight that occurs that makes us think, oh, maybe there's some benefit. Anyway, so much detail on the further causes of shamatha vipassana, and then the obscurations, a wonderful presentation on the general obscurations to meditation practice, beginning with on the bottom of 19, agitation, then remorse, sluggishness, drowsiness, doubt, pleasure-seeking, malice, laziness, forgetfulness, dullness and agitation, non-exertion, and excessive application. That seems like a rarity, but compared to the others. The remedies. It goes through a wonderful list of remedies for these, which in a large, the major ones on page 24 are suppleness, which is the translation of this term, Xinjiang in Tibetan, that Trungpa Rinpoche was very fond of, that he translated as synchronizing body and mind. Like, if we want to do something with our mind, our body actually follows suit. And if our body needs something, our mind actually follows suit. Suppleness, pliancy. Next is mindfulness on page 25, not forgetting a familiar object. So becoming familiar with an object, such as, I don't know, your mind. Becoming familiar with your mind and not forgetting your mind. Can't leave home without it. Not forgetting to look at your mind. Similarly, the breath. We're familiar with our breath, and it's always there. So not forgetting it, not forgetting to breathe. Fortunately, Both the mind and our breaths happen of their own accord, whether we remember them or not. Alertness. When mindfulness has become non-forgetfulness, there is recognition of dullness and agitation. So when we actually start applying mindfulness, when we actually succeed in remembering the object of meditation, immediately we experience agitation and dullness. This is called the waterfall stage in the tradition, where, we finally come into the experience of our mind, and we find out that our mind is all over the place. Which, until we sit, we're not really that, most people are not really that aware of, at least not the extent. And then on the page, on top of 26, there's a quote from Shantideva. Repeatedly examine the condition of your body and mind. That alone sums up the definition of what it means to protect alertness. Just constantly examining our body and mind, checking. Some people do that a lot physically, right? We're hyper concerned with our appearance, but they often don't do that with their mind, or we often don't, or I often don't. It's applied intention. The equanimity of remaining in the natural state, the ability to have the equanimity to rest once we've discovered the state of meditation. And then in particular, how to prevent dullness and agitation, which are the two main obstructions to meditation, which is on page 27. It's a wonderful presentation of that. And then on page 30, what are shamatha and vipassana? And this is the sort of walk through the text that I had imagined when I assigned like 300 pages of reading for tonight. Just sort of flipping through and like checking in on important sections. So again, from the Unraveling the Intent Sutra, staying alone in isolation, having correctly settled their mind internally, bodhisattvas bring to mind those dharma topics upon which they have reflected carefully. They are attentive because their mind continuously engages internally with the mental state that is being brought to mind. The physical and mental suppleness that arises while abiding that way and resting in that repeatedly is called shamatha. And that was, if you're like me, that was an unusual explanation of shamatha, I thought, which is mostly a demonstration of the difficulty of understanding the sutras and why we have such a reliance upon the explanations of the what are called the acharyas or teachers of India who wrote commentaries on the sutras. So what does that mean? And then, having achieved physical and mental suppleness, they abide there and relinquish mental images. Their minds go blank, I guess. They discern, they're not blank, and have conviction about the Dharma topics being reflected upon as the representations for the sphere of internal samadhi. What is that? With regard to those representations for the sphere of samadhi, any differentiation of the meaning of knowable objects. What are noble objects?
Like Buddha images.
Like Buddha images? Mary Beth?
Are they just things we can know?
Yeah. Anything that we can know is a noble object, right? It's like
I misunderstood. I thought you said noble.
Sorry. So noble objects is a technical term for everything. Sue.
Well, I was just thinking about those six ways of knowing,
Yeah, we're going to get to
you
those real
know.
soon.
So, but that's how you know. Those are the things you could know.
You could sum it up in terms of those six, and we'll see what it
Well,
is in a minute.
in terms of seeing the phenomenon as what they appear, the appearances of them, but then it goes down to nothing. So,
Am I mistaken? It sounds to me like this paragraph is saying that some sort of conceptual certainty is arising from the practice,
Sounds that way to me.
right? That's what he's saying. The practice, and that, because that's what the discerning is about, and the conviction.
Yes, very much an analytical practice that leads to certainty of knowing the way things are and their extent. And then we have simpler presentations from the Jewel Cloud Sutra. Shamatha's one-pointed mind. Vipassana is discernment of what is true, what is real. From Maitreya's text, the ornament for the Mahayana Sutras, know the path of Shamatha to be the summary of the names of the Dharma. What's a good summary for the names of the Dharma? Inez, do you have one? What do you got?
I was actually thinking back further about what is the one-pointed mind? What is the one point?
It could be
Just on an object?
on anything, but it's the idea that it doesn't get distracted to other points.
Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't indicate what the point is, but just that there's one of them. A very sharp mind. It's like your head comes to a point. Pencil head. Sue.
well, I was thinking today about that one-pointedness and about the idea of short meditation sessions. And so if a meditation session is a moment, then if you were moving from point to point, would you still be on point? Or is that total not
Every moment is a moment of one-pointedness, whatever it is
right?
we're thinking about. It could be a different point every moment, but each particular
But
moment.
yeah.
And so the
So
implication here is that there's a stream of moments with the same point.
yeah.
Makes a big difference. So that's a good clarification. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then finally, at the bottom, it, meaning the ornament for the Mahayana Sutras, also says, or actually, sorry, to finish this one, know the path of Shama to be the summary of the names of the Dharma. This is a very odd way to phrase Shamatha. Know the path of Vipassana to be the analysis of their meaning. So Shamatha is like, what is my experience? The names of the Dharma is like, what do we all experience in this realm? And then what do they mean? What is the meaning? But more simply, on the basis of correct stillness, mind rests in mind. Which, from some point of view, is a totally meaningless statement, like mind resting in mind. Like, it sort of has no meaning. But from an experiential point of view, I think it's really helpful. It's like mind just being in its own place. It's like we sort of know what we're thinking about as we're thinking about it. We know what our mind is experiencing as we're experiencing it. Our mind is in our mind, being mindful, remembering our mind. And secondly, because phenomena are thoroughly differentiated, is Vipassana. Those are shamatha and Vipassana. So the thorough differentiation of phenomena. And that thorough differentiation generally is presented as having two steps or two aspects. One is sort of dividing up or distinguishing the characteristics of our experience, and then knowing their nature. Like, what are the different things that we're experiencing? One of the main strategies for the fixation on the belief in itself is lumping everything together, the feeling of unity. And so the first thing we do is we break down that unity. Oh, there's 5 skandhas. Oh, there's 51 mental factors. There's a zillion different thoughts in my head. There's different thinkers of those thoughts. Breaking things down and then looking at how they exist. Are they existent in the way that they appear or not? Continuing on to the divisions of shamatha vipassana, page 34. Shamatha is either mundane or transmundane shamatha, so we can practice mindfulness, as it's sometimes called now in the common world. Be a better business person, be a better basketball player, whatever it is. And there's transmundane shamatha, which is aimed at liberation. When it's categorized by its function, there are the 3: shamatha, resting at ease in the present life, and the others. I can guess what the others are, but I'm not really sure, and it doesn't talk about it, so it's probably not worth dwelling on. The most well-known is the categorization by the means of method, by means of the method, the 9 stages. Just such an interesting way to refer to the 9 stages of shamatha. We usually think, oh, we use the method of mindfulness, alertness, and conscientiousness, and overcoming obstacles with antidotes, and by that we achieve the 9 stages. They present it as the stages are methods. It's an interesting difference. On the right-hand side of the page, what are the types of vipassana? Page 35. There are 3 types arising from characteristic and so forth, as taught in the same sutra. That which arises from characteristics, that which arises from thorough investigation, and that which arises from discernment. So breaking down what I just gave as being 2 steps, as identifying, distinguishing different phenomena and understanding their nature. This presentation stretches out the understanding of their nature into 2 parts: thoroughly investigating their nature and then discerning their nature. So first, the vipassana of which arises from characteristics, which identifies the characteristics of our experience, and then it thoroughly investigates our experience, and then it discerns the nature of our experience. So breaking down the sense of a self, and then investigating that sense of a self. What do we project the sense of self onto? What basis? The body, the mind, and so forth. And then what is the nature of that projection of self onto body and mind? And does it actually hold water, so to speak? And let's see, then on the bottom of the page, there's the 4 types of vipassana. The 4 types of vipassana that differentiates phenomena, differentiates thoroughly, discerns completely, and analyzes completely. Very opaque terms. Completely opaque. The explanation: what is vipassana? The differentiation, thorough, and so forth. It doesn't really explain it. So later in the text, he gives wonderful explanation of these. But let's see. At the bottom, from the Shravaka Bhumi, which is the text by a Sangha. It's one of the 5 parts of the Yogacara Bhumi compilation. What are the 4 types of vipassana? Bhikshus based on the internal mind's shamatha. There, the differentiation and so forth. How is differentiation done? It's conducted with the quantitative aspects of the objects of meditation. And let's pause there. The quantitative aspects are like the variety of the different aspects. The term quantity and qualitative here is a little bit unusual, but it refers to the variety of objects, or the variety of the characteristics of objects of meditation, such as skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas, such as negative emotions. So we see that it's the objects of meditation for purifying behavior, expertise, and purifying mental afflictions. These three types of objects, which we'll come to. And so differentiating, what are the different characteristics of these types of meditation practice? Simply speaking, this is something like, what is the cultivation of Maitri, loving kindness? How do we cultivate Maitri and loving kindness? What do we focus on? What do we let go of? For compassion, for sympathetic joy, and for equanimity, similarly, what are the characteristics that we cultivate? And then there's the thorough differentiation that's conducted with the qualitative aspect. What is the nature of those experiences? What is the nature of loving kindness? What is the nature of compassion, and so forth? When attention endowed with prajna joins with discernment to apprehend the characteristics of those three objects, purifying behavior and so forth, that is complete discernment. When there is correct discernment, that is complete analysis. Again, not very clear. Not very clear. Anyway, this is common Vipassana, Sutrayana Vipassana, which we don't focus on that much in our tradition in an explicit way. We actually focus on it a lot when we study what we call Abhidharma. When we study Abhidharma, we think we're studying philosophy, but we're actually practicing Vipassana. Let's see, the order of them is pretty straightforward. Both of them are, so I'm continuing to flip ahead. Both of them are necessary, it's pretty obvious. Interesting section briefly on page 40 of the way to unify. How do we unify shamatha and vipassana? It's not much on the text or other texts on what is the unification process. You may wonder, how exactly are they unified in the context of meditating on vipassana without having achieved the ninth mental state of rest sitting? That statement in itself is quite interesting, indicating that, yeah, we can practice vipassana without having accomplished the ninth state of shamatha. There are many ways of unifying vipassana with each stage of shamatha. However, here the approach is to unify the consummate shamatha and vipassana. So here the approach in the common tradition of the Sutrayana type of meditation, the general way of practice is to consummate your shamatha practice and consummate your vipassana practice, and then to bring them together in the following way. Once you have achieved the ninth mental state of resting, the shamatha of equipoise, free from the faults of dullness or agitation, when you exert yourself in the vipassana of the differentiation of phenomena, that vipassana engages naturally. And he lists the vipassana of the differentiation of phenomena as one aspect, one type of vipassana. And it would be similar with the others, that once you have accomplished shamatha, vipassana arises naturally. Like the ninth mental state of resting, it proceeds effortlessly. Without excessive application, vipassana becomes pure and cleansed, and so forth. Let's continue going ahead, and we enter into the common shamatha section that begins on page 47. And if we're curious, we have a presentation on page 48 and 49 for the different objects of meditation that were just referred to. And these are not really that important because we basically boil things down to meditation on the object of the breath and then meditation on the mind. But in case you were wondering what all of these are, he gives a rather nice presentation of the different objects here. And I think the thing that makes this section or this presentation of the four objects difficult to understand is that we generally think that if you're giving a list of four things, that they would be exclusive. And these are completely not exclusive. There's a huge amount of overlap. Basically, the universal objects includes everything else. And the objects for meditation for expertise involves using all the others in a way that brings fruition. So there's all this overlap. And really the discrete ones are the ones for purifying mental behavior on page 49. Focus on ugliness, to experience detachment, kindness, to cultivate, to overcome aggression, dependent origination, to overcome ignorance, focus on the dhatus. He doesn't say why. And focus on the inhalation and exhalation of the breath to counteract, it appears, distraction. So
You said pride before. You said number 4 helps us overcome pride. I haven't.
Bingo. Thank you. That's great. All right. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, the pride that of thinking like I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm the one doing what's happening. And when we understand the dhatus, we see that we're a complex coordination of different aspects of different phenomena that are coming together and interacting according to the laws of karma. And I have very little to do with it. Generally, all I do is mess it up. And so I have the pride of thinking that I'm actually the one in charge. Thank you, Mary Beth. And then the fifth one for those of us who are distracted. And so we see that it seems like the entire lineage has concluded that we're all distracted because basically everybody gives meditation on the breath. It's a pretty fair conclusion, I think. And then finally on the bottom of page, on 50 we see these expertise, which is skandhas, dhatus, ayatanas, which again are all focused on understanding selflessness, in addition to dependent origination, and what this thing that's called what is the case and what is not the case is often called what is true and untrue. So the workings of karma, basically, which is not that different from dependent origination. So all of these are actually fairly overlapping as well. And then purifying mental afflictions, focus on the subtleties of absorption states versus their opposites, and then the focus on the Four Noble Truths, four truths for noble ones in order to experience liberation. Little presentation of who should observe what, that concludes that we all should observe our minds. And on page 54, another section on the way mindfulness and alertness sustain the object. Mindfulness and alertness, in the quote, create a close focus because the first prevents the mind from straying from its object, and the second recognizes when it has strayed, when it fails. Our mind is like an untamed elephant. I like the quote in the middle of 55. Chandra Goman laments, if I apply exertion, agitation arises. If I abandon that, slackness occurs. If it is so hard to find the right balance between those, what should I do with my disturbed mind? It's a famous story in the Zen tradition where Bodhidharma comes from India to China and develops this rumor that there's this great Mahasiddha meditating in this particular place, and students come and he blocks the entrance to where he's meditating. He ignores everybody. And one particularly adamant student really is dying to meet Bodhidharma, and like sits outside his cave for days, and Bodhidharma finally says, "Why are you here?" And the student says, "Please, I am so confused and screwed up. Please pacify my mind." And Bodhidharma says, "Show me your mind and I'll pacify it." And he attains enlightenment and becomes his main student. And they live happily ever after. Anyway, the way to practice shamatha on the bottom of page 55 is the 8 applications that are the antidotes for the 5 obstacles, then the 9 stages and the 6 powers or strengths and the 4 types of attention. And let's take a peek at the 6, because it's less than 9, it's easier to deal with. On page 59, the 6 powers, I think, is a very hopeful scheme. The strength of hearing produces so they're correlated with the 9 stages. So skipping over what stage it correlates, but is by having heard from someone else about how to settle the mind on the object of meditation. So we listen when we get meditation instruction. We listen to the instruction, pay attention. And then there's strength of reflection, skipping over what state it enables. Since you repeatedly reflect upon and sustain your initial examination of the object. So we're given instruction and we review the technique. What were we supposed to do? I can't remember. There were so many different things to do. So we become familiar with them and the subtleties involved in them. Why do I keep my eyes open? Why do I let go of the in-breath? Why do I label thoughts? And how does that impact my experience of the cultivation of a stable mind? And then mindfulness. If you're distracted from the object, mindfulness will cause you to recollect the previous object of meditation and draw your attention back. And this is one of the key views of meditation in the Buddhist tradition, is that mindfulness is mindful of the last moment of consciousness. And so we create a stream of moments of being mindful of the last moment, and thereby create a continuity of stable mindfulness. Because we're not able to be mindful of the present, because mindfulness does not happen through the senses, it happens through the conceptual mind, actually. Interestingly. At least initially, until we come to accomplishment, and then it becomes a non-conceptual experience that presumably is happening in live, real time, as they say. Real time. From the start, the force created by the strength of mindfulness prevents the mind from wandering from its object. The strength of alertness brings achievement, blah, blah, blah. Alertness is aware of thoughts and secondary mental afflictions as they arise, and the mind pursues them. Secondary mental afflictions are like remorse, regret, lack of contentment, things like that, which don't sound like things that we experience, but it's a way of characterizing like our endless thoughts about what should I do next, what do I have to take care of, what happened yesterday with so-and-so, things like that. In the mind, let's say alertness also sees their disadvantages and does not allow the mind to scatter. So the disadvantage of becoming wrapped up in the endless thought process about the three times, the past, present, and future. Diligence or exertion, not tolerating even the smallest thought or secondary mental affliction. Being very intolerant, it energetically eliminates them, and because it creates a continuous samadhi not interrupted by dullness or agitation. So this is where dullness and agitation are completely quelled, to use a funny term. Familiarization, state of equipoise, the strength of familiarization with and habituation to all of the above causes your mind to settle in samadhi naturally and effortlessly. So basically by continually applying the above factors or powers, in particular mindfulness, alertness, and diligence, and applying them correctly so we don't over-apply them. We don't continue to apply pressure on the mind when it's not needed. Brings about equanimity or familiarization or equipoise. Vipassana, page 63. The general way of cultivating Vipassana. There are three types. Mundane Vipassana, like how does a car work? And then a lesser type of supramundane Vipassana, supramundane. So mundane Vipassana is of the world. Supramundane takes us beyond the world, meaning samsara, that's the world. Lesser type of samsara transcending Vipassana is that of the so-called Hinayana, and then there's the Mahayana Vipassana. The first is Vipassana that focuses on the aspects of calmness and coarseness. So this is Vipassana that assists the development of the absorption states. The middle is the Vipassana that focuses on the four truths with an emphasis on refuting a self, a person's, and the latter is the Vipassana that is to be cultivated here, which we see extends the emphasis on the refutation of a self from persons to all phenomena. We see the three types of Vipassana repeated. Characteristics. So it gauges the characteristics of objects. What is our experience made up of? Our senses, our thoughts, our emotions, etc. Some way of breaking down our experience. The Vipassana that arises from thorough investigation is the project that understands what was not understood about the abiding state of the view. That's not very helpful. But investigates the way that those factors of existence, those characteristics, actually might exist, as opposed to the way that we assume they exist. And then thirdly, the discernment is the prajna that is capable of liberation and is directed towards Dharma topics that were well understood, i.e. selflessness of persons and phenomena. So, having investigated the way that we mistake phenomena as having a self, we then discern the way that phenomena are without a self. And then we have the presentation of the four types of Vipassana, which are pretty similar to what we just went through. So I'll skip that. And then after that it says the Shravaka Bhumi teaches the Vipassana of 6 categories, which is what Sue mentioned a few minutes ago. Those 6 categories, which it says contain all forms of Vipassana, are the investigation of meaning, entities, characteristics, qualities, time, and reasonings. So these 3 schemes are the traditional versions of Vipassana, and they all correlate. They all fold into the 3 fold version of Vipassana that we saw at the beginning of this little section. There's also a system of 11 modes of Vipassana that he goes through in the bottom of that page onto the top of 65 that comes from Vasubandhu, which is an expansion of the same schemes, basically. And then he says, to summarize, the sutras and texts on the stages of meditation use the analogy of fire arising from the friction of two sticks to demonstrate the necessity of the prajna of discernment. The prajna of discernment. Not a sort of a vague term also, like how does discernment relate to discrimination and investigation and examination and analysis? What do these different terms mean? But the prajna of discernment seems to be this sort of overarching term that includes all of the other terms I just went through. The prajna of discernment and analysis during the preparatory phase of Vipassana. So what is the preparatory stage? We'll come back in the analogy of the fire and the sticks burning up and disappearing in the end to show that there is no object of meditation for discernment, analysis, and so forth during the actual practice of Vipassana. So this very interesting summary introduces the idea of there being a preparatory phase and a so-called actual practice of Vipassana. And so the preparatory phase as presented here involves discernment and analysis. And the actual practice of Vipassana involves the burning up and disappearing of, well, he doesn't clearly say, he says the fire and the sticks, right? So the sticks are a metaphor for the aspects of our experience, the characteristics that we experience, the skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas. That's the sticks of our world, the bones of our world, objects of knowledge, whatever we experience, phenomena in general, are the sticks. And the fire is the fire of prajna, of knowledge, of understanding. And so in the preparatory stage, we are applying fire onto the sticks. We're investigating, we're analyzing the aspects of our existence, the different aspects, the variety of them, and how they actually manifest. And then in the end, all of it burns up. So all of the sticks burn up and the fire of analysis burns up. And there's the actual Vipassana of experiencing emptiness, not analyzing it, not discerning it, not investigating it, but experiencing emptiness. And these correlate roughly to what are called analytical and non-analytical Vipassana. Analytical Vipassana being the Vipassana that is applying the fire of knowledge to the sticks of our world, our conceptual mind. And non-analytical Vipassana is the burning up and dissolving of all of that conceptual structure. And interestingly here they're presented not as like two alternative paths to take in Vipassana practice, but they're presented as having an order of first analytical and then that can result in non-analytical. We see later in the tradition there's different takes on this where sometimes non-analytical is presented right away. You might be familiar with one of those approaches. It's famous approach of Trungpa Rinpoche. It's just letting go into panoramic awareness. Could be understood as the actual phase of Vipassana, of sort of fruition, of just letting go into the experience of the true nature of our reality, right? So let's see. Then there's a long section on how do we generate the view for Vipassana? How do we come to an understanding and a conviction in emptiness? And that being what the substance of Vipassana is all about. And so there's a process of using the three types of prajnas of hearing, contemplating, and meditating in order to bring about the understanding of the view from contemplation, a conceptual understanding that's then brought into the practice of Vipassana, where that conceptual understanding ideally it heats up and then burns up and dissolves. The conceptual structure dissolves into the experience of the absence of belief in this or that. So we see on the bottom of page 69, the substance of this section on cultivating the views, the way to meditate on the twofold absence of self. And there's a long presentation of that. The self of the persons and then the self of phenomena. We can skip through those. And then identifying the correct view on page 79. And many quotes. It's on page 80. All sorts of nice quotes. In the very middle, not conceiving of either non-arising or arising is the practice of the sublime prajnaparamita. So an equation or a correlation of prajnaparamita practice with Vipassana practice. Vipassana in the Sutrayana tradition is understanding prajnaparamita. How do we bring that into meditative equipoise on page 81? So we become firm in that understanding, that we develop conviction in it, and then we return to that in our meditation practice. And then finally, on page 83, how do we then expand that into our post-meditative state? And the term illusion-like. Remembering the illusion-like quality of samsara. When you experience post-meditative appearances, which are outside of our meditative equipoise, embrace them with the energy or light touch of the mindfulness cultivated during the space-like equipoise described above, from the bottom of page 83. In truth, appearances do not inherently exist, yet they manifest vividly in their own mode of appearance as if they exist. That is why post-meditative attainment is called illusion-like. This is referred to in many statements, such as blah, blah, blah. So this quandary of like things don't really exist in the way they appear, but they continue to appear to exist. And so this illusion-like existence that we all partake of. On the next page, 84, illusion, the meaning of illusion-like is as follows. The conceptualization of the appearances that arise to the post-meditative mind with the thought they are not real, they're illusion-like, is called intellectually fabricated illusions, and it's just a presumption that things are illusion-like. Well, that may be useful in some phases, since it involves conceptualization. It's not the point of meditating on all phenomena as being illusion-like. In that case, we may wonder, how is it done? Skipping a few sentences. Well, I don't know. He doesn't really explain how, does he? But at the end of the paragraph, he just says, Yogins and yoginis, however, know that from within, that whatever appears. So we know from within, we sort of come back to that conviction that phenomena are empty, that whatever appears is simply an appearance and does not have nature or essence of that appearance. And the last section of the common section part of the book is removing doubts. And there's this issue of analytical and resting meditation. So the text on that page says the distinctions between these two. Some think that the meditation of panditas are Mexican scholars. No, they're Indian. It's the Indian term for scholar. It's only analytical meditation, and that the meditation of kusalis, which are yogis, is only resting meditation. Similarly, others think that the only thing scholars do is analyze in the context of study and reflection based on the scriptural systems, and all kusalis do is rest in equipoise, referring to esoteric instructions. That is not how it is. Scholars need the resting meditation of remaining in equipoise with the object of meditation, and kusalis need the analytical meditation that cuts through misinterpretations, i.e. superimpositions and denials in the context of the view. Superimpositions and denials is a technical term, two technical terms, meaning first, superimposition is thinking that something is there that's not there, i.e. a self or a chair, and denial is thinking that there's nothing there, denying appearances as having any function. Appearances are empty, but they function. Those who don't use both analysis and resting will have difficulty discovering the true object of meditation, because the view that is sought through critical investigation alone is an intellectually created view, and the view that only involves resting stays at the level of a mental experience. So we need both resting and analytical meditation. Sue.
Well, I was re-looking at this and I was just wondering what it has to do with doubts.
Well, I guess he's saying there's a lot of confusion. He's using the word doubt. I guess like confusion. There's a lot of confusion in the tradition as to these two types of meditation and these two types of ways of being, of pandits and kusalis. And so people presume that vipassana is an analytical meditation, and that shamatha is a resting meditation, and that's a vast oversimplification. Or people think that shamatha and vipassana are both resting meditation, and that's an erroneous simplification.
Okay.
So
there's a whole chapter on this, and I just don't quite get what he means by doubt, but that's okay.
I think just confusion over them, because it leads a lot of people to think, oh, I don't need to study, I'll just practice. And that leads other people to think, I'll just study, I don't need to practice. And the point is, we need both. So let's see, flipping through the end. So then he talks about the explanations that remove doubts concerning the actual view of other systems and our own system. And so here, the idea of doubt is that other traditions, other than this Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra, have injected doubt in the minds of practitioners by saying, oh, you're doing this wrong. And in particular, there's two gentlemen in Tibet, famous gentlemen, who complained about the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition. One was Sakyapandita, and the other is Tsongkhapa. And so he spent some time responding to their objections, their statements that have caused doubt in the minds of practitioners. Because doubt in the minds of practitioners can be very harmful. It can produce a frozen state where we're stuck and we don't know which way to go. In the mind of someone studying, doubt is very helpful. It's like, I don't understand what's being said, or I don't understand why my understanding is wrong. And so doubt propels us forward in the realm of study, but in the realm of practice, doubt tends to be of the type that keeps us stuck on actually what do we do in practice. this session and in our practice over time. So that brings us to the end of the common Mahamudra tradition and the end of our time. And so maybe I'll try to do a very quick review of the remaining sections in our next class as we forge off into sustaining the recognition that was developed through the practice of Vipassana and the pointing out of the Mahamudra tradition. Any last comments, questions, suggestions, thoughts? Rob?
You said something very interesting at the beginning of the class about the part that listens versus the part that's chattering. And I think that's a really interesting distinction, because I think the part that listens is the part that actually where the study lands. And that's the part that does something with that study in the practice. That's the part that wakes up to meditation. And the chatter is sort of like the distraction, or trying to make it self-important. It's trying to build a self. It's sort of, that's the confusion, or part of it. Anyway, I just sort of been ruminating on that a little bit. That's sort of what I'm coming up with now.
That's great. Thank you. That statement was prompted by these articles that came out in maybe a year ago about how some people don't have an internal dialogue. Like there was some large percentage of 25 or 50% of people don't have an internal dialogue, which I find to be untrue. I think they just don't realize it. But I think it's very interesting to think about what goes on, particularly when we do the practice of looking at our mind, is finding out what goes on in our mind. And I think we all have this narrator who's describing what's going on or what we're doing. And I agree with Rob that I think that narrator is the one that sort of tells ourselves stories that are based on our habitual reactions from past experiences, and that can very much keep us entrenched or imprisoned in our habitual patterns into the future. And that it's very helpful to realize that we don't have to listen to that voice. And to sort of realize that there's someone else in the room other than that voice. And then to think about, there was that section early on in this text that we just went through of intent. And intent is hugely important in our path and our practice and our just experience of ourselves in our world. Is what is this thing, intent or will? Who's deciding what we're doing every moment, and small picture and big picture, and how do we over time change our habitual patterns? How do we change bad negative behaviors? How do we change limiting behaviors? How do we open our minds? How do we create a path to transformation? If we don't actively try to do these things, they don't come about of themselves. Maybe we're fortunate and we have somebody in our world who will help us and push us, a partner or a sibling or a friend who's challenge our status quo. But if we don't continue to pursue that, just do what we've always done forever. So I think it's important to think about what is intention, and how do we accomplish what we want to accomplish in this life, and cultivating that. And we're not here for a very long time, so let's make use of it. Anything else? Sue?
Well, it's related, and it has to do with allegiance, inside the mind, and it's sort of like intention, but is that intention or is that something, I don't know.
It's hard to come up with exact names for these things, but
Yeah, but that has you not look at all that chattering because when you are, it's like you are having allegiance to that self-referential belief system, and then
well, how do we change our habits? How do we gain the ability not to give in to physical
oh,
the
I know,
physical
we're the
pattern?
practice lineage.
There you go. Practice, practice, practice. Right. Yeah. How do athletes and people in extreme situations, how do they overcome their urge to go to sleep or whatever, And then let's close.
So you're talking about paying attention to the chatter, but not falling into it or running with it.
Well, noticing it
But
as opposed to just like normally it's like we're unconscious and we're like
right,
just believing it, and we think we are the chatterer.
right. Like we're the only one. I'm the only one. Why does this happen to me?
Always happens to me. So let us close and with the dedication of merit. By this merit may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you. See you again soon.